Picture a mountain pass in the dead of winter, 2,400 years ago. A column of soldiers is dragging itself up through the snow. Greek soldiers, 10,000 of them, give or take, starving, frostbitten, almost a year's march from home, deep inside an empire that wants them dead. Then the men at the front begin to scream. The scream rolls back down the column, rank after rank, getting louder as it comes. In the rear guard, an officer grabs a horse and rides hard for the front. Because when 10,000 men start screaming, it usually means an attack. It isn't an attack. It's one word, over and over in Greek. Thalata, thalata, the sea, the sea. To a Greek, the sea means ships. Ships mean Greece. And these men, lied to, abandoned, betrayed, and given up for dead by everyone who ever knew them, have just found out they might actually make it home. The officer on the horse is the reason any of them are alive. He is the most unlikely commander in military history, an out-of-work writer named Xenophon, who 2 years earlier had never given an order in his life. This is the story of how a man nobody hired led the greatest journey home ever recorded. Start with what he was, a nobody with famous friends. Xenophon was an Athenian, about 30, from a good family in a city that had just lost everything. Athens had spent his entire lifetime at war with Sparta and lost. No fleet, no empire, no careers for young gentlemen. The one thing he had was his teacher, a barefoot philosopher named Socrates. Then a letter arrived. An old friend was a general for Cyrus, a Persian prince, the younger brother of the king of Persia. And Cyrus was hiring Greek soldiers, good pay. Come east, the letter said, meet him. Xenophon asked Socrates what to do. Socrates told him to ask the god at Delphi, the most famous oracle in the world. Here's what Xenophon actually did, and we know because he confessed it himself in writing. He rode to Delphi and he did not ask, should I go? He asked, which gods should I sacrifice to for a safe journey? He'd already decided, he just wanted the paperwork. Socrates was not impressed, but the god had been asked and the god had answered. So in the spring of 401 BC, Xenophon sailed east. No rank, no command, no job. A tourist walking into the biggest double cross of the ancient world. Because Cyrus was lying to everyone. The 10,000 Greek mercenaries he'd hired were told they were putting down some hill tribes. A summer's work, it wasn't. The marchers kept going east and east until, at the banks of the Euphrates, Cyrus finally said it out loud, we are marching on Babylon. He meant to kill his brother and take the throne of the largest empire on earth. The Greeks were furious. They were also 1,500 miles from home, and the only paymaster in 1,000 miles was the man who'd lied to them. He offered a raise. They took it. And here's the thing, the plan worked. Near Babylon, at a place called Cunaxa, the armies met, and the Greek line did what Greek heavy infantry did to everyone in that century. It swept the field in front of it. But Cyrus charged straight at his brother, and a javelin caught him below the eye. The Greeks had won their battle and lost their war in the same afternoon. Their employer was dead, his rebellion with him, and 10,000 foreign soldiers were left standing in the dead center of an empire with no reason to be there and no way home. Until the Persians offered them one. A truce, safe passage. The king's own commander would personally escort them out of the empire. And why not? 10,000 desperate veterans with nothing to lose make an expensive enemy. For weeks, the two armies marched north side by side, neither quite believing the other. But guides appeared, markets appeared, the arrangement was holding, and mile by mile, some of the Greeks let themselves believe it. Then the Persian commander made a warm, reasonable offer. Send me your generals. We'll sit down and clear the air, leader to leader." 5 Greek generals walked into his tent under a flag of truce. 20 officers went along and waited outside. The generals were seized at the table. The officers outside were cut down where they stood. One wounded captain made it back to the Greek camp, holding himself together with his hands, and gasped out what had happened. The 5 generals went to the king in chains and were beheaded. In one evening, the army had been decapitated. On purpose. Xenophon was there for the night that followed, and the way he tells it, it wasn't panic, it was worse. Hardly anyone lights a fire, hardly anyone eats. Men lie down wherever they happen to be and stay awake all night grieving for their countries, for their parents, for wives and children they are never going to see again. 10,000 professional soldiers lying in the dark, quietly giving up. And in the middle of that camp, the tourist lies awake with them. Then, he says, he dreams. A bolt of lightning strikes his father's house and everything burns. He wakes with a start and with one question. Why am I lying here? Nobody is coming. The generals are dead. Every hour of darkness is an hour the Persians aren't using to finish the job. So the man with no rank gets up in the middle of the night and goes from fire to fire, shaking officers awake, telling every one of them the same 3 things: that they were not dead yet, that someone had to lead this army, and that it might as well be them. By dawn, he is standing in front of the survivors, a civilian in a borrowed breastplate, talking 10,000 men out of surrender. And the army does the most Greek thing there is. It votes. New generals elected on the spot, and one of them, chosen in his dead friend's place, is the writer. What followed was 5 months of the hardest marching in recorded history. They burned their own wagons and tents, formed a hollow square with the wounded at the center, and fought their way north, inventing rear-guard warfare as they went. In the mountains, tribesmen rolled boulders down the passes and hurt them worse in 7 days, Xenophon wrote, than the king's whole empire had in months. Then came the highlands, winter, snow 6 feet deep. Men went snowblind. Men lost toes to the frost. Starving soldiers sat down in the drifts and refused to move, and had to be begged, threatened, and dragged back up, because sitting meant dying. What saved them was kindness. Mountain villages in houses dug underground, warm as cellars, where a frozen army thawed out drinking barley beer through straws. And then, near the coast, the land itself turned generous. Orchards, villages, beehives heavy with wild honey. Surely the worst was finally behind them. The starving army gorged. Which is how the army that the entire Persian Empire could not stop was finally defeated. By desert. It was the mad honey of that coast, and it poisons like a drug. Within hours, thousands of hardened veterans lay sprawled across the meadow like the casualties of a battle no one had fought. Xenophon records it with a perfectly straight face. The men behaved like drunks gone out of their minds. Not one of them died. The army was simply unavailable. For about 3 days. Then they got up and kept marching. The book, you'll notice, moves briskly past this part. Which brings us back to the mountain. 5 months, more or less, after the night of the murdered generals, the men at the front crest a ridge and start screaming. The rear guard grabs weapons. Xenophon grabs a horse. You know this part now. It isn't an attack. The sea. The sea. When he reaches the top, he finds 10,000 men weeping, generals hugging captains, hard men who didn't crack at the betrayal, or in the passes or in the snow, sobbing at a grey line of water on the horizon because that water touches every harbour in Greece. And then, with no order from anyone, the soldiers begin gathering stones. Stone by stone, a pile grows on the summit, a monument to no victory, raised by no command. It says the only thing 10,000 men needed it to say, "We were here, we made it." Days later, they walked into a Greek trading city on that shore and did the most Greek thing imaginable again. They sacrificed to the gods and held games on the beach, races, wrestling, boxing, like men home from a long war. Which, in every way that mattered, they were. It wasn't a fairy tale after that. The army nearly came apart on the coast, and Xenophon himself ended up exiled from Athens, put out to pasture on a quiet farm of all things by Sparta. And that farm is where the legend was actually born, because that's where he wrote it all down. The book became one of the most famous true adventures in the ancient world, and one of the most dangerous. Every Greek who read it learned the same lesson between the lines. 10,000 abandoned men had marched into the heart of the Persian Empire, and the empire could not kill them. The superpower of the age was hollow. 70 years later, when a Macedonian king marched east to break Persia for good, Greeks like to say his road had already been scouted by 10,000 ghosts. So here's the reason this story belongs on this channel. The most famous journey home in history is the Odyssey. One hero, 10 years, monsters and witches and gods, one of the greatest stories human beings have ever told. And walking right beside it, 24 centuries old, is this one, the journey home that actually happened. It ran on nothing. No gods showed up, no hero was chosen. Just hired soldiers on the wrong end of someone else's coup who held a vote, and a jobless writer who decided at the bottom of the worst night of their lives that lying there wasn't a plan. And that decision, the getting up, has never once required armor or a title or a throne. There's no marble monument to any of this. There never was. Just a pile of stones on a mountaintop historians still argue about, stacked by exhausted men that nobody ordered to build it. Homer needed 10 years and a god to bring one man home. The real Odyssey needed one man who stood up in the dark. Now, the honest asterisk, and this episode's is a beauty. Almost everything you just heard comes from one source, Xenophon. The hero of this story is also its author. He wrote it decades later, as an old man, and when he mentioned the march in another of his books, he pointed readers to the account written by one Themistocles of Syracuse. As far as anyone can tell, Themistocles of Syracuse never existed. It was him. He wrote the story of his own heroism and then recommended it under a fake name. And the one other ancient account that survives tells the same march, the lie, the betrayal, the sea, while barely mentioning Xenophon at all. It hands the command to a Spartan officer. Our hero gets a walk-on part. How big his role really was, we honestly don't know. The march happened. The sea was reached. The scream was real. The size of the hero is the one thing history can't confirm. And you deserve to know that. One more thing quickly. The 10,000 is a nickname. The count changed at every muster, and thousands of them never saw the sea. If you want more true stories about the moment before the famous became famous, subscribe. Every source, ancient and otherwise, is listed in the description.